So this video is for Stony Point High School Algebra 1 Unit 3 review. The problem we will be going over is finding slope or rate of change from a table. So with this table, it is a vertical table, meaning that the table goes up and down. Remember that you might see the table horizontally. So for this example, it would have been XY. -5 goes with -10, -1 goes with -1, 2 goes with 5.75, and so forth. So remember, tables can go either way, and it doesn't matter. And then the problem says, what is the rate of change of y in respect to x? And remember, anytime you see rate of change, that is the same thing as slope, and so that's what we're looking for here. Remember that slope is represented by the letter m in our equations, and so we use that in the formula as well. And it is found by finding the change in y over the change in x in situations. So sometimes we will use the phrase rise over run, where rise is the change in y, run is the change in x, and that's typically used for graphs. We can also use the slope formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, and a lot of times that's used for 2 points. It can also be used with a table really easily. And then a lot of times with table, we'll just stick to the original change in y over change in x. So notice that my table goes ahead and tells me the first column is x and the second column is y. If that is not your case in your table, it should always be x first and then y second, and that's the same for horizontal. X on top of the horizontal table and y on the bottom. So if it's not labeled, it's a really good idea to go ahead and do so yourself. And then next to that column, actually put the change. So next to the x column, I'm going to put change in x, and next to the y column, I'm going to put change in y. And I could do that on the horizontal table as well. So change means what do I have to increase or decrease, add or subtract from one value to get to the next. So from -5 to -1, what I notice is that's going up, and actually all of these values are increasing. X is increasing. And y, if you look at y, -10, -1, 5.75, and then 14, those are also increasing. And so as x increases, y increases. This means that your answer is going to be a positive answer. As x increases, y increases is a positive slope. So if it's a multiple choice question, you could actually eliminate any negative answer. So going back to find change in x, remember change in is just what do I have to add or subtract to get from -5 to -1. And that would be adding 4 units. Now I do want to check that the table is the same, and sometimes it's not. So from -1 to 2, that actually goes up -1 to 0, 0 to 1, 1 to 2, so that increases by 3. And then from 2 to 6, that increases by 4 units. Because I do have different change in x values, I should have different y changes. And so when I'm finding my slope using the formula, I want to check all of the options. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of erasing to give myself some space here. Okay, so our change in y, same thing. What do I have to add or subtract to get from -10 to -1, which be an increase of 9. From -1 to 5.75 would be an increase of 6.75 units. And then from 5.75 to 14.75 would be an increase of 9 units. Remember, when I say increase, I mean plus. If I said decrease, that would be a minus, and having those units are very helpful, the plus and minus. So now that I have all my changes, I'm actually going to fill in the change in y over change in x fraction. So for the first set, 9 and 4, that would be change of y of positive or plus 9 over the change in x of a positive 4. 9 divided by 4 does not reduce, so that slope would be the fraction of 9/4 or the equivalent decimal of 2.25. Now, because I had different changes, I want to check all of them. So the next one is a change of x of plus 3 and a change of y of plus 6.75. So again, change of y was a positive or adding of 6.75, and my change in x was a positive 3. So 6.75 divided by 3 is also 2.25, which you can then turn back into fraction, which would be 9/4. And the third one is the same as the original. The first one we did, change of y of a positive 9 over change of y of positive 4. So that would give you that same answer of 9/4 or 2.25. So because the changes ended up being the same in all the cases, we know our slope is 2.25 or 9/4. So with a table, just remember that you want your change of y over your change in x. So for a vertical table, x is typically the first row and y is the second row. And so you want to find your change in x. What do you have to increase or decrease? Plus a number or minus a number. And then same for your change in y. What do you have to add or subtract in either case? And you can do the same with a horizontal table. X is always the top and y is always the bottom. So your change in x, what do you have to add or subtract? And then change in y on the bottom. Be careful with your horizontal tables because it looks like x is on top, y is on bottom, but your slope needs to be y on top. So with the horizontal tables, be really careful. Okay, hope this helped. Bye. I actually forgot to show you how to use the slope formula using the table, which I mentioned at the beginning, and I wanted to show you that. So remember, slope is change of y over change in x, which is what we just used, but you can also use the slope formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And so to do so, the first thing that you're going to do is identify 2 points. So I'm just going to use the first point being x1, y1 in the table, and then the second row as x2, y2. And then I'm going to rewrite the formula without any numbers, so the division symbol and the 2 negatives, and then I'm going to fill in those values. So y2 of -1, y1 of -10, x1 of -1, and x1 of -5. And the key thing to remember with the points, especially when you have negatives, is that even though the equation has a minus, when I have a negative value, I also have to leave it there. So you don't want to say -1 minus 10 and use the minus as your negative. Remember, it's minus a -10. Okay? So now I'm ready to simplify. 2 negatives are positive. So I can change this to -1 plus 10 over -1 plus 5, okay? And then I can keep simplifying that. -1 plus 10 is +9. -1 plus 5 is a +4. And as we saw with the original way of doing the problem, 9 over 4 is as reduced as it gets, or you can leave it as the fraction. Leave it as the decimal, which is equivalent to the fraction of 2.25. So we originally showed you how to use it with change of y over change in x, and this was a quick example of using the slope formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1.